we are going to look at my 1960s comic book collection, and we begin to look through the year 1965 in comics. And here we get to January, and this month we have a couple of things. One of my favorite, I don't have tons of Spider-Mans, but I do have a couple around this area. And of course, this is one of the great villains of all time. I have to find a way to get into the weather control station, and here using jet skis, which is pretty exciting. And hey, we're almost there. We're getting very close. Come on. A few months before this, we begin a new Captain America series, and I read these originally in reprints, the first couple, but the Incredible Sumo story was one that I did not get reprinted, and it is a very amazing story. And what made people decide that they should go to World War I was propaganda posters, and color lithograph posters were pretty much a very new technology. They had been sort of pioneered in France in the 1890s. I'm talking to you from the land of snow and syrup and softcore communism. Let's take a quick look at what you're fighting so hard to not be like Canada.
Not I'll have to come back here and smite you. And grind you inexorably underneath my warrior's heel, for I am Marg, Princess Warrior.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Well, hello, good day, and welcome to the program wherein we are going to look at my 1960s comic book collection, and we begin to look through the year 1965 in comics. And here we get to January, and this month we have a couple of things to look through. We have a Strange Tales, and so I've been always a real huge favorite of mine. And we're going to take a step back to November of 64 with the quarterly publication of Magnus the Robot Fighter, an absolute gem of a comic book. Here, this one, before there was a Terminator, there was the military attack robot that Magnus had to karate his way through. So these are some real classics that we can go through today, and so we can then have a look at some of the various things going on in 1965. And Kirby has also started a Captain America series going in Tales of Suspense, so we'll have a quick look at where we are in that, and what is going on in Fantastic Four this month. Not super exciting. As they say, March is our big turning point, so this is just where I'll just gather a bit of the background as we move forward and see just how significant the month of March of 65 really was. Welcome back to our sorting through a 1965 comic book collection and looking at that year in comics and using the incredible resource of YouTube to be able to look at some of the television and other media going on at the exact same time, and we can actually see the interplay that's going on. And of course, Marvel Comics Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby are very tuned in to both the media that is going on, and they both have a good understanding of art history and the place the United States is playing as New York is becoming the new international art center of the world. It does play an important part in how Marvel Comics system and approach just becomes miles ahead of anything else. And as the industry leader, DC Comics slowly catches on, something really big is happening, and they begin to scramble to try to catch up. And here we have November of 1964, Magnus the Robot Fighter #8 by Gold Key Publishing by the amazing Russ Manning. Now, Russ Manning would become most famous for his work on Tarzan, and unfortunately he got drawn away to Tarzan, ended up doing the syndicated Tarzan strip in the newspapers. Now, Magnus Robot Fighter is another one of those comics that I think I bought the very last one. I remember looking at the very last one. I'm pretty sure. Yep, I visualized my copy. Yep, it's very dogged. Yeah, I bought this one on the last issue of Magnus the Robot Fighter for the newsstand. Anyway, this is, so I bought all these after the fact, and this is one of the great ones. This is the assault on the weather control station, and so this is the situation where they are having their weather festival, and because they have complete weather control, they then go through a thing where within the course of a day they experience a whole bunch of different weather patterns, and then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, everything goes all to heck in a handbasket because they have a tornado now. And so as this is going on, Magnus notices a young lad who's being menaced by robots, and of course, because he's really keen on keeping track of what goes on with robots, he leaps to the rescue, and in that way that he defeats these robots with his incredible karate powers. Sadly, Magnus never kicks a robot in the head in his entire, I don't think once, but other than that, he is using Asian martial arts in the future because they very accurately predicted that people would know a lot more about Asian martial arts in the future, and here we are. So, defeats the thing, and he finds out he meets the young Howie, then they're being assaulted by terrible weather, and then he meets this group that is the Outsiders, and the Outsiders is this group of anti-technology youths who have joined together to reject the coddling of the robots and are now going out on adventures on their own. And here they are stopped by robots who say, no, this trail is too dangerous for humans, you cannot go there. Now, the thing that we can notice right away about this group in 1964 is that this is indeed a multiracial group. And we have a black member of the group, a blonde guy, and a guy with brown hair, very broad Caucasian representation, and an Asian fellow who unfortunately is colored in the way that Asian people were still being colored in the early 60s. And it is that vivid lemon yellow color that is really quite offensive nowadays. The Outsiders recount as they started trying to circumvent the trail, they accidentally started an avalanche, and this avalanche frees up an ancient battle robot. Yes, this is a fully militarized, weapon-bearing robot with a mission to, get this, destroy the weather control station, because this is back in those crazy days in the past where weather control was considered I'll try again. Where weather one more time. Where weather control was considered an evil thing and people. Okay, so the attempts at trying to create another avalanche to stop the robot is really ineffective, and they realize that, wow, this is indeed very heavily armored and very well armed robot indeed, and he continues to very easily overcome the security robots at the weather control station and completely take control of it. And this is where we return to the present with Magnus now using a robot's batteries to try to keep them warm as they're being assaulted by a blizzard. And then they have to find a way to get into the weather control station, and here using jet skis, which is pretty exciting. And hey, we're almost there. We're getting very close. Come on. Then, okay, this is 1964, remember. The weather control station then assaults them with acid rain, and the acid is burning their skin. And they did not have Ronald Reagan there to protect them. Can you believe that? He actually protected the environment. Those were the days. Well, he dismantled your government, but that's another story. So then they use the jet skis to blow up a cloud of salt to then create a neutral, well, I guess a base turns them into a salt. So anyway, I'm sure there's a rational chemical explanation. So then they get inside the station, and here they find the rest of the boys. Now look at this, they're toting, laser guns and everything, and it gets pretty James Bond level hellacious in here. Look at this chaos. He is fighting, he's blowing them up, the things are exploding, he's chopping heads up robots left and right. The boys are in there, they're shooting, whoa, and even getting getting shot up a bit. And so then Magnus goes in and he is trying to stop this thing, and he's using everything. He sets off the fire suppression system, and he's being shot by little tiny missiles. And then finally he just goes, okay, I doesn't have a neck that I can chop off of my patented karate chop, which would be yoke minushi in Japanese striking terminology, and he rips the head right off of this thing, and sure enough, it is neutralized, and the boys are then touted as heroes. And baby, their decision to leave the technological embrace of robots behind was a good idea after all. Now there is a letters page, and there's a secondary strip, which is another thing that Russ Manning came up with. And this is the aliens. This is a whole other storyline where we have humans meeting up with alien envoys from another civilization, and these aliens are indeed some of the most alien aliens we've ever encountered. And in this particular story, the crew of the, forget what the ship is, goes to the alien world, and they are intercepted by radical aliens who then turn out to be radical anti-human aliens that lead them into a chamber with very poisonous dissolving gases. God, that sounds pretty darn familiar. And anyway, fortunately, they are discovered, and these aliens have all sorts of incredible mental powers. And as you can see here, the evil members of their society are obliterated by some pretty powerful telekinetic powers. And well, fortunately, their helmets are only pitted, and they did not in fact get burned to death in the torture ovens on the planet of aliens. Absolutely brilliant. And Kirby's also started a Captain America series going in Tales of Suspense, so we'll have a quick look at where we are in that. And while we're wool gathering in virtual comic book collection, we'll also look back on Tales of Suspense, because we've just begun the Captain America series that is going to become one of the most important comics that Kirby's doing. But here he starts out a bit slowly, and this did layouts for a certain period, so it's still, I think, a year out before Captain America becomes really important, and some of his best work from this period. So Tales of Suspense begins as the vehicle for Iron Man for the first few issues of the series until a few months before this, we begin a new Captain America series. And I read these originally in reprints, the first couple, but the Incredible Sumo story was one that I did not get reprinted, and it is a very amazing story. And it sort of explained to me where the idea of the kingpin came from. Now, without actually splitting hairs and questioning what a sumo wrestler is doing in Vietnam, the more important subject here, of course, is that this is an adventure happening in Vietnam, and Captain America is rescuing a black American fighter pilot who has been captured in Vietnam. So the larger point of the story is A, accepting the escalation of the Vietnam War, which won't be very popular for very long, and the much more important issue of which is, of course, racism generally and racism in the military specifically, because, well, that's going to become a real problem really quickly. And coincidentally, this is also the theme of the second to last Green Llama story. So go figure. So what we're talking about when we're talking about the breakthroughs going on in comics, the big changes going on in music, and of course some of the science fiction television shows that are going to be super influential. These are real big changes in media. They're big electronic media changes. But we forget that, we've been having technological breakthroughs in media for generations and generations. And so we can also make some comparisons to other times where media and propaganda were very significant in the development of history. And of course, when you look at what's going on right now, these startling events in America with, when we think about it, a narrow victory for the forces of corporate fascism. And so we're looking at a 1.4% voting margin. We got the very terrible legislation pushed through Congress with one deciding vote. So it is just by the skin of their teeth victory, but it's enough because they got it all. But we can also look at this as the comparison between World War I and people volunteered to go to World War I, and what made people decide that they should go to World War I was propaganda posters. And color lithograph posters were pretty much a very new technology. They had been sort of pioneered in France in the 1890s, and then of course in the early part of the 20th century it really started to pick up. And so by the time 1914 rolls around and everybody wants to go to war, the world was blanketed in these very heartrending, very, very convincing propaganda posters, and people lined up to go to one of the most horrible industrial hell world events mankind had ever conceived of. And of course, many, many people died. And that's not going to happen here. You're going to have to rebuild your government. Sure you will. But I'm talking to you from the land of snow and syrup and softcore communism. Let's take a quick look at what you're fighting so hard to not be like Canada. Why? Let's have a look at the CBC talking to former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, and let's see how the Canadian media interacts with Canadian politicians, and just realize things don't have to be quite so stressful as you all make them.
I remember now you first ran for the leadership against Wilfrid Laurier, is that right?
Yes.
And I remember, now had you won that, your career would have been much different. The Chateau Laurier would be the Chateau Chrétien. And of course, you would have been on the $5 bill.
Oh my God.
These would have gone out had you won. What was that like, running against Mr. Laurier?
Oh, he would have probably defeated me.
Some people are giving Mr. Carney a hard time because they say his French isn't good enough. Do you need to be bilingual to be Prime Minister? Because you never really learned English.
Neither French.
And if you don't get on that and talk Aileen into it, because I know you did before, and if not, I'll have to come back here and smite you and grind you inexorably underneath my warrior's heel, for I am Marg, Princess Warrior.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, and we'll be auctioning off copies of Hashish, A Smuggler's Tale, autographed by the Justice Minister.
Kingston Penitentiary has closed down. What's going to happen to those people? Are they going to go directly into the Senate?
There's nothing that strikes fear in the hearts of politicians more than seeing the logo this hour has 22 minutes coming at you.
You big baby. Come on, we just want to talk about fashion. John Baird just ran away from me.
We need to make fun of people, and you're always doing something stupid.
I'll try to keep you in business.
All right, thanks.
Yes.
Let's wake up Canada again.
God love you.
Thank you.
Why are we not sending an armed force north to liberate Canada from Trudeau? And I mean it.
Oh, the horror. I mean, it's so hard for us to understand what you people are doing down there, because you just take yourself way too seriously. Canadians only talk about our culture one way. We talk about it jokingly. We talk about it in comedy. I worked in renovations for the last 25 years, and if somebody shows up on a job site and they don't have a joke or an insult, we're disappointed. We're kind of thinking they're not pulling their weight. I mean, that's just how we deal with our culture. And I think you will benefit from our benevolent friendship, which of course will inevitably lead to a lot of jokes at your expense. And, well, I can't stand the heat. Don't come to Canada. So we have time for one more incredible comic book, my great favorite, the Spider-Man meets the Scorpion. So let's have a look at that, and we'll then talk about what is Canada's superpower, do you think? So January of 1965, we open with one of the greatest Spider-Man villains, the Incredible Scorpion. And amazing that the Scorpion's never been used in the MCU, because he really is one of the most important characters in the development of Spider-Man. And he is the doppelganger. He is the evil opposite character, and he's specifically been created to have powers just like and even more deadly than those of Spider-Man himself. And so the story begins where we have a subplot going on where Peter Parker's being tailed, and there's something going on, and he's got to try to keep a low profile. And we can already see here that this is already what Ditko's introducing. Is he's got these long, convoluted, Machiavellian, if you will, subplots going on, and that's where he's keeping his story interesting. He's introducing all these ideas that are being hinted at. Here's our other things on the newsstand, the weird Gideon issue, sort of Spider-Man appearance in the Avengers, and the very issue of Journey into Mystery that we were just talking about. So then it turns out, of course, that the character who's tailing Peter Parker is someone who is in the employ of J. Jonah Jameson, and it's part of his ongoing plan to find out what's the real deal with Spider-Man. So in this situation, he is introduced to a scientist who believes that he has invented a process whereby he could create another character as powerful as Spider-Man if only he had a little bit more money to fund his researches. And J. Jonah Jameson says, what? Somebody tougher than Spider-Man? All right, I'm in. I'll finance this project. And so sure enough, the scientist develops this chemical process and certain kinds of stimulation that are not unlike something that we saw with Captain America many years earlier. And he does indeed make him superhumanly powerful. And not only is he a chemical biologist, no, he's also an engineer, and he can build a very powerful mechanical tail, which he then attaches to the Scorpion, that becomes a deadly weapon that he must then indeed learn how to use, which is a little trickier than he first thought. But he is tougher than nails. The experiment is a success. Meanwhile, Peter Parker's private life is in ruins, as always. Confronting old J. Jonah, he then swings back out into the city and is immediately ambushed by a powerful assailant who really lays into him. So Spider-Man goes, okay, this guy seems pretty tough. I better really lay him out with the big haymaker. And he absorbs it like it was nothing and proceeds to beat Spider-Man very severely with his fifth limb, this incredible tail that just keeps clobbering him and outmaneuvering him. So Spider-Man goes, okay, I'm getting a little pressured here. I better use my most powerful weapon, my webbing, and net this guy up. And J. Jonah says, oh, damn, I spent all that money for nothing. And then we find out that the Scorpion also has super abrasive fingertips that allows his fingers to act like pincers and cut Spider-Man's webbing, which he then picks up with his tail and throws it at Spider-Man, tangling up in his own webbing before he lays into him one more time. Back at the lab, the scientist realizes, oh, this process just seems to keep continuing. It doesn't ever stop. He's just going to keep getting more powerful and more arachnid-like. And, well, then he'll turn into a full-on Scorpion Man, which, of course, I never did, which nowadays you'd totally go with the Scorpion Man angle, but, of course, the fly hadn't been remade yet. The poor thing, his spider gets fully clobbered, just beat to hell, and thrown into an abandoned water tower, left totally unconscious. Scorpion is then drunk with power and says, I can do anything. I can just go take stuff from anybody. Who's going to stop me? I can rip open this armored car and just take the money. What are they going to do? Nothing, that's what. And so he then realizes, this is it. It's a life of crime for me. Spider-Man, waking up, goes, the hell just happened? And our scientist has realized that the error of his ways and says, look, I have an antidote. We can stop this process. You can become an ordinary human again. Scorpion says, what are you, nuts? I'm having the time of my life. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take my money and just have a really great time. This scientist, who turns out to be a rather spry for a scientist, climbs up the building after him and then, in a desperate move, throws his antidote potion, completely missing the Scorpion, and falls to his death. Well, crime doesn't pay, even if you're doing evil research that I'm not following that. Falls to his death and pays his debt to society for creating an evil Scorpion Man. Anyway, so the Scorpion totally gives in to his horrible power. J. Jonah Jameson is realizing maybe he's created a bit of a problem here, as this guy is just turning into a just one-man rampage and is clobbering Spider-Man repeatedly with his overwhelming brute power. Then he decides to turn on Jameson himself, and Spider-Man has to try to save the day because, well, Betty Brant is in the way, and so fortunately, J. Jonah gets her out of the room, and Spider-Man then, as is often the case in these stories, has now had a couple of goes at the Scorpion, but he's had time to think about a strategy. He comes up with a whole new approach to fighting the Scorpion, and first, netting him in the face with a small net, he then puts a big gooey gob of web fluid on the floor, sticking the Scorpion's feet to the ground, and then, grasping his mechanical tail while he's still blinded, he tears the tail right off of him. And then there's finally, in an equal clinch, they go toe to toe, and Spider-Man wails away at this guy who's hard as nails. But Spider-Man, he's got spidey senses, so in a wailing battle, he's going to come out on top. And sure enough, he totally clobbers the Scorpion, and everything works out. But of course, he gets home and he is not looking so good, so he has to make up a story about having a bit of a run-in with the school bullies. And then, of course, there's repercussions all over the place, and Spider-Man's left sewing up his costume again, going, boy, it isn't easy being a superhero in 1965. And we see also a couple of the other comics going on. Ditko is also introducing the humanoids in his first leader story, and some strange tales, which we will look at next. So, what is Canada's superpower? Well, let me explain it to you in a few simple words that every Canadian knows in his, her, or their bones. Winter is coming, and we all know that. And so why are Canadians polite? Because everyone in Canada knows that Canada can kill them. And any one of your neighbors might be the person who's digging you out of the snow, putting out the forest fire right next to you, pulling you out of the flood. We don't know what it's going to be, but we just keep our options open and are just generally polite to everyone just in case, because that person might have to risk their lives to save your sorry ass, and you don't want them being resentful if you don't need to. And of course, you think about this in broader scale when you look at the countries that have the greatest level of social medicine, freedom, and such forth. We are looking at countries like Denmark, Sweden, Norway. Are you seeing a pattern? Canada. Yeah, people who understand what winter is understand we got to work together or we're not going to make it. And it's only people who live in hot places without seasons that think the world is a video game. And that's going to get a lot of people hurt. And that ain't funny. And we're going to again take a step back. Tales to Astonish. We have Ditko is working on his leader story, one of the greatest villains for Hulk of all time. And so we'll have a look back at that. And when Kirby moves on to work on other characters, Stan Lee continues the character with various artists, and eventually Dick Powell. And in 1964, with Tales to Astonish number 60, Marvel begins an interesting project where they split their superhero titles in the Tales to Astonish and Tales of Suspense, putting 2 superhero features in each one. And so here we see the return of the Incredible Hulk, and Steve Ditko does this very brief and incredibly influential series where he really readdresses the whole character of the Hulk and makes him really the Hulk that we all know and love today. One of the first things, of course, is he readdresses the mechanism that turns him into the Hulk. In the original 6-issue run of his solo series, he begins transforming at night. And then there is also a rather bizarre mechanism of a giant gamma ray cannon that the Hulk and Bruce Banner can use to irradiate themselves and initiate the change back and forth one way or the other. As we begin this series, Ditko points out very directly that it is fits of anxiety or fear or that or anger that will trigger the transformation to the Hulk. Banner is still working for the military, developing nuclear technology of various kinds, and in this story he's actually working on developing an armored suit. That this story is actually an homage to an earlier story that appeared in Tales of Suspense only a couple of years before, that was done by Jack Kirby, and this character's name was Metallo. And the Metallo character is essentially the same idea of a armored suit to be used in the event of full-scale nuclear war, and it's because this test is going to be so dangerous, they use a convicted prisoner as the test pilot, offering him a reduced sentence if he survives. And so he gets into the suit, and they put him at very near ground zero of a nuclear test, and he does survive. But significantly, the hatchway to the door of the suit is welded shut, and he is trapped in there. And so where he does have a brief period of being the strongest man on earth, he realizes, but I have to live in this armor for the rest of my life. And then he becomes a perfect character here for Ditko to have a character that can stand toe-to-toe with the Hulk. And we see when they finally confront each other, the Hulk beats away, almost having no effect at all, until he himself gets so excited that he initiates the transformation, and he begins to turn back into Bruce Banner. As he transforms back to Bruce Banner, he's recovered by the troops, and we see the robot man trundling off over the ridge to escape. So, before we go any further, the bullshit poker game between the Red Skull and our guest host, JP Patches, the illustrious Seattle broadcaster, who I have the utmost admiration for. And we'll talk about him probably next episode. So, in the second story of Tales from Start number 61 of November, all right, so we begin depicting the cliffhanger situation that's going to happen later on in the story, but we resume the story from the point of view of our villain, and as he knocked the Hulk down the hill towards the military who would pick up Bruce Banner, he himself wanders down the ridge and discovers a cavern that is indeed one of Bruce Banner's own hidden scientific bases. Well, what a fabulous coincidence, he thinks, and he then realizes that with his own scientific knowledge and engineering skill, he could use this material to jury-rig an automated missile system that he could use to menace the very military base that Bruce Banner is working on at this very moment. So, when they inevitably confront each other one more time, the Hulk begins again with his seemingly fruitless attempts to beat up this almost indestructible robotic suit, and in fact he even gets knocked to the very edge of a very deep chasm as the powerful robot suit is able to pick up a giant boulder that he's going to menace the Hulk with as his automated missile system begins to fire, and it's looking really bad for not only the Hulk but also the military base as well. And the Incredible Hulk is the last moment able to jump off the edge of the chasm, rebound off the opposite edge, and fly back to assault his very stunned looking assailant who's thinking, I really thought I had him there. Unfortunately, he did not, and he's unceremoniously knocked into the bottomless pit, it turns out to be, and vanished forever for the history of Marvel Comics. And the Hulk is able to burst out of the camera just in time to see the launching of the jury-rigged rocket, and is able to leap into the sky and detonate the missile in midair, but in doing so, he himself is stunned and knocked to the earth in a situation wherein he does not, in fact, turn back into Bruce Banner. And because he does not turn back into Bruce Banner, the military is able to rig up a very intense system of bindings to hold the Hulk in place. And so we end this story with the Hulk in another tight spot as he is bound with military-grade hardware. The way I understand it, this is, of course, Evil Spock versus the crazy white gorilla thing with the poison bite or claws or whatever the heck it was. And, well, because I'm guessing that this is before Evil Spock gets the machine that makes locates and makes people disappear, which we could pretty much call the Omega Effect machine. He doesn't have it at this point, so the giant gorilla creature that we saw in many variations, in many programs over the years, would kill Evil Spock at this stage, I think. So, JP1. Our next episode, in number 62, we begin the story with a mysterious figure working in a laboratory, speaking to a character we have seen before in Spider-Man. It is the Chameleon, the man of 1,000 faces, and we see a couple of them lying around here. Now, meanwhile, Rick Jones, who is on good terms with the Avengers and the Hulk at the same time, operates here as a go-between to kind of put in a good word for the big green guy. So, as one might expect, the man of 1,000 faces ends up infiltrating the military base and, wouldn't you know, impersonates Dr. Bruce Banner, who he locks in a closet and begins to menace Betty Ross. And, of course, this creates a situation of anxiety for Professor Banner, and he does indeed transform into the Hulk and breaks free, thus giving him the best alibi for his secret identity he will ever get, as the Bruce Banner has to be thwarted in this case by a quick-thinking Hulk.
Now, right now, we're having a hard time with our American neighbors, but it's not the first time. There was a time when the Americans wanted us to go invade Iraq with them. You stood up defiantly. You said no. Right now, Canadians are coming together like never before because of this American threat. Is Canada broken?
Absolutely not. You know, I propose that we should give the Order of Canada to Trump because he has helped us to unite so much.
Absolutely. Nobody has done more for Canada in the last little while than Donald Trump.
Yeah, but when I said that, one guy said to me, Jean, you cannot succeed to have it for him. I said, I can't.
Why not?
Because you cannot have the Order of Canada when you have a criminal record.
1965 begins with one of the all-time great Hulk stories ever written, and this is the introduction of the humanoids, which we will see several times in the future, but never quite the same way as we did the very first time. So one of the great opening pages of all time, we have a mysterious figure wearing a rather heavy helmet that does not allow us to see his identity, standing next to his creation, which was one of the best designed weird characters that we have ever seen. There's been a huge number of robot creatures in comic books by this time. It was a popular thing even back in the 30s and 40s, but this is one of just the real eye-catching great designs. And then we find out more about the actual concept of the humanoid, and that is even more fun. A Titan rides the train is again one of the contributions we'd have to give to Stan Lee. He was really good at developing these really dramatic titles.
The power, cut it!
Wait a minute, look!
In the year 2071, scientific superbrains manufacture almost human robots. Whole armies of androids that fight off the feared mutants.
Wait a minute, you can't go out there. The mutants are everywhere. They're
But our story opens with the character remembering, as he's taking off his helmet, the terrible atomic accident that happened to him that took him to the hospital, where he's discovered he had a ravenous appetite for information, and he started to read at an alarming rate. And then one day, as he was absorbing this huge amounts of information, he's overcome and he falls and feels a terrible transformation, which has grown his brain to unnaturally large size, and the leader is born. But looking back at the very first issue of The Incredible Hulk, we will notice this is very much like a one-time appearance character created by Jack Kirby, and that is the Gargoyle, who captured the Hulk, took him back to Mother Russia, where he's being controlled by the Soviet government. But Dr. Banner's knowledge of atomic science leads him to create a device that would indeed cure the terrible disfigurement of the Gargoyle and returns him to human form. Again, a motif we see numerous times in Kirby stories. Then curses his military overlords and helps Bruce Banner escape in a rocket back to America. And when his military leaders confront him in his now newly human form, he laughs and activates the terrible self-destruct device that he has rigged up to take them all to a fiery atomic death. And Bruce Banner waxes poetic on the formerly monstrous Gargoyle returning to a very human state indeed. And this, again, after we've refreshed our memory on the atomic accident that has created the leader, he then starts to experiment with his newest creation, the humanoid. And what we see is that it is an artificial humanoid that he controls by a by mental commands. So he dons his headset, which has the electrode connections that allow him to mentally transmit commands to his artificial humanoid, and with a screen he can operate it through a telepresence by seeing through the humanoid's sort of eyes, and so thus, and then he sends the humanoid off to a helicopter to seek out a new nuclear device being transported by train at that very moment. Now, as the humanoid catches up with the train with its military guard, he lowers himself in a way not unlike the Blue Beetle would in a couple of years later, and we notice another property of the humanoids, which is they are made of an elastic substance that is permeable in a way that they're able to shoot right through his body without doing him any harm. Of course, because Bruce Banner was involved in developing all the technology that they used in this military operation, he's on the train and learning of the invasion by the humanoid. He gets, of course, upset, and he transforms into Hulk once more and rushes to confront the humanoid, who has detached the rail car containing the secret device. So when the Hulk leaps upon the humanoid, he is rebounded with great force from his elastic properties, and the leader, when he is able to see the Hulk, suddenly realizes that he's got color television on his telemonitor, because the Hulk has green skin. So of course the leader having color television in 1964 isn't like a big deal. He's like a year or two ahead of the curve. Then starts to bash away at the humanoid and finds that this creature is so elastically resilient that it simply absorbs the force that he throws against it. And then another ability that we only see this very one time, the humanoid is also able to send an electrical shock through his grip and is able to stun the Hulk and throw him off of the train. Of course, rebounds and attacks the humanoid again. At this time, the humanoid uses its elastic properties in another way as it wraps itself around the Hulk and starts to smother him with his own elastic body. But fortunately, the Incredible Hulk is more resilient than the humanoid, and so when they fall off the train and bounce along the side of the tracks, it's the humanoid that stops functioning and not the Hulk, and giving the Hulk time to rebound once again, and thus he can capture the nuclear device before it falls off the train, and he saves the day just in time to turn back into Bruce Banner once more. Whew, what an issue that was.
Mr. Polyev says
he wants to kick you out. He wants you to be an unemployed guy.
He wants to get rid of the CBC.
Yeah, but not the French one.
No, he'll
Radio Canada.
That's what he says in French. In English, it doesn't matter. They always say one thing in French, one thing in English.
Yeah, but they are Tories. They speak on both sides of their mouth. Something I cannot do.